Sammy Hagar didn't just listen to Elvis, Led Zeppelin, James Brown, and Little Richard. He survived them. Each voice rewired his instincts. Each performance rewrote his future. And together they forged a rock legend who learned early that music isn't about sounding good. It's about hitting hard enough to change you forever. Sammy Hagar stands at a rare crossroads in rock history where raw instinct, cultural rebellion, and musical lineage collide. And when he talks about Elvis Presley, Led Zeppelin, James Brown, Little Richard, and the architects of modern sound, he does not speak as a distant observer, but as someone shaped by their gravity. His voice carries the weight of a kid who watched music turn from entertainment into identity, from radio noise into a personal calling. Elvis was not just a singer to him, but the moment America realized that sound could shake the room and the soul at the same time. Sammy remembers how Elvis moved, like the rules did not apply to him. How confidence itself became an instrument, and how that fearless presence planted the idea that music was not meant to be polite. It was meant to be felt in the bones. That lesson stayed with Sammy long before he ever stepped onto a stage of his own. When Led Zeppelin entered the picture, the impact was seismic. Sammy does not describe them as a band, but as a force of nature that redefined power. The heaviness was not just volume, it was intention, precision, and mystery. Jimmy Page's guitar did not simply riff, it summoned atmosphere, while Robert Plant's voice sounded like it came from somewhere ancient and untamed. For Sammy, Zeppelin showed that rock could be dangerous and beautiful at the same time. They proved that music could stretch, breathe, and take risks without losing its grip on the listener. That realization pushed him to chase intensity without sacrificing soul. To believe that ambition and sound was not arrogance but evolution. James Brown hit him from a completely different angle, yet with equal force. Where rock leaned into distortion and rebellion, James Brown brought discipline, rhythm, and absolute command. Sammy talks about the way James Brown owned every second on stage. How nothing moved without intention, how the groove itself became law. Watching James Brown was like watching a master craftsman who knew that chaos only works when it is controlled. That sense of precision reshaped how Sammy thought about performance. Not as random energy, but as something earned through focus. The sweat, the sharp turns, the relentless rhythm. All of it showed that funk and rock were not enemies, but cousins separated by culture, waiting to collide. Then there was Little Richard, the explosion before the explosion, the spark that lit everything else on fire. Sammy speaks about Little Richard with a mix of awe and gratitude, because without him, the rest does not happen the same way. Little Richard did not ask permission, did not soften his edges, did not explain himself. He screamed joy, rebellion, and freedom into a microphone at a time when that kind of expression was risky. For Sammy, Little Richard represented pure release. The idea that music could be loud, flamboyant, and honest all at once. That spirit became a blueprint for how to survive in an industry that often tries to tame what it cannot control. What ties all these legends together in Sammy Hagar's mind is not genre, but courage. Each of them stepped into the unknown and refused to step back. Elvis broke cultural barriers. Led Zeppelin rewrote the scale of rock. James Brown demanded respect through rhythm, and Little Richard shattered expectations with unapologetic fire. Sammy absorbed all of it like oxygen. Not copying, but translating those lessons into his own voice. He learned that authenticity is louder than technique, and that presence can outweigh perfection. These influences did not make him famous, but they made him fearless. As Sammy's own career began to take shape, those early lessons echoed constantly. Every stage felt like a conversation with the ghosts of his heroes, a silent promise to bring the same honesty and heat. He did not want to be a museum piece or a tribute act. He wanted to push forward the same way they did in their time. That hunger separated him from countless others who could play the notes but never carried the fire. For Sammy, music was not about chasing trends, but honoring a lineage of risk-takers. Listening to him talk about these icons feels less like nostalgia and more like a survival story. These artists gave him permission to believe that being different was not a weakness but a weapon. They taught him that the audience responds to truth even when it is rough around the edges. That belief carried him through doubt, through reinvention, and through the constant pressure to stay relevant. In his mind, relevance was never about age or charts, but about whether the music still meant something when the lights went down. By the time Sammy reflects on Elvis, Led Zeppelin, James Brown, and Little Richard together, it becomes clear that he sees them as chapters of one long story. A story about sound becoming freedom, about stages becoming battlegrounds, and about artists daring to be larger than the moment they were given. That story did not end with them. It continued through voices like his, shaped by their courage, fueled by their risk, and driven by the same unstoppable need to be heard. Looks back across decades of noise, sweat, and survival. The influence of those giants never fades into the background. Instead, it sharpens. Elvis taught him that charisma could carry a song further than polish ever could. Sammy understood that people follow belief before they follow melody. When Elvis sang, it sounded like truth, even when it was simple, and that honesty became a North Star. Sammy carried that lesson into every era of his career, knowing that audiences forgive imperfection but never forgive boredom. That understanding shaped his confidence, his stance, and the way he commanded space without apology. Led Zeppelin left him with a different hunger, one rooted in scale and atmosphere. Sammy learned that music could feel cinematic, that silence could be as powerful as sound, and that tension was a weapon if you knew when to release it. Zeppelin did not rush their impact, they let it loom. And that patience changed how Sammy approached songwriting and performance. He began to think beyond singles and hooks, toward moments that lingered long after the final chord. That sense of depth helped him evolve rather than burn out, allowing reinvention without erasing identity. James Brown's influence revealed itself most clearly in Sammy's respect for the stage as a sacred space. There was no room for laziness, no tolerance for half-effort. James Brown demanded everything from his band and even more from himself. Sammy absorbed that discipline, understanding that professionalism was not the enemy of passion, but its foundation. The way James Brown controlled tempo, movement, and crowd energy showed Sammy that a performance was not accidental. It was constructed in real time through awareness and instinct. That balance between freedom and control became one of Sammy's greatest strengths. Little Richard, however, remained the reminder never to become too careful. When the industry pressured conformity, Little Richard's voice echoed like a warning. Be loud, be strange, be undeniable. Sammy held on to that spirit during moments when playing safe would have been easier. He knew that edge was what separated legends from footnotes. Little Richard proved that joy itself could be revolutionary, that volume could be liberation, and that fearlessness was contagious. That lesson mattered deeply as Sammy navigated fame, criticism, and the endless cycle of expectations. Through success and setbacks, these influences merged into a single internal compass. Sammy never tried to outdo his heroes. He tried to honor them by moving forward. He believed stagnation was the real failure, not mistakes. That belief allowed him to experiment, to change bands, to shift sounds, and to remain visible in an industry that often discards artists once their moment passes. His longevity was not accidental. It was earned through adaptability rooted in respect for the past. When Sammy speaks now, there is no bitterness in his reflection, only clarity. He understands that music history is not a competition but a relay. Each generation hands the fire to the next, hoping it burns brighter rather than safer. Elvis lit the match. Little Richard poured gasoline. James Brown controlled the flame. Led Zeppelin let it roar. Sammy took that fire and ran with it, not perfectly, but honestly. That honesty resonated with people who recognized authenticity. Even when it came wrapped in distortion and sweat, he often points out that these legends did not wait for permission or approval. They moved first and dealt with consequences later. That mindset became essential in a business driven by trends and algorithms. Sammy trusted instinct over prediction, feeling over formula. He understood that cultural impact could not be focused, tested. It had to be lived. That understanding kept his music grounded in human emotion rather than calculation. The connection between these artists also revealed something deeper to him about American music itself. Rock, funk, soul, and blues were never meant to be separated by labels. They were expressions of urgency, identity, and release. Sammy saw himself as part of that continuum, borrowing freely and giving back honestly. He never believed purity mattered more than passion. If a song made people feel alive, it had done its job. Looking back, Sammy does not frame his story as destiny but as alignment. The right voices reached him at the right time, and he listened. That willingness to listen might be the most important lesson of all. He listened to records, to crowds, to silence, and to his own instincts. In doing so, he stayed connected to the same pulse that drove his heroes. That pulse never cared about age or trends. It only cared about truth. In the end, Sammy Hagar reflections on Elvis, Led Zeppelin, James Brown, Little Richard, and the others are less about memory and more about gratitude. Gratitude for courage modeled, paths opened, and risks taken before he ever knew how to take his own. Their legacy lives not just in recordings, but in every artist who chooses honesty over comfort. Sammy remains one of those artists, still chasing the same fire, still believing that music matters most when it refuses to sit quietly.